Hey everyone, this is Chris Davis, your video and feature producer here at 4Player, and finally, here's my list of my top 10 games of 2020. To start off my list this year, I have what will no doubt go on to be one of the most controversial games to come out in the past decade. Cyberpunk 2077 has been a long time coming, and was seen by May to potentially be a hallmark title in the years and months leading up to release. CD Projekt Red, before late last year, had been seen as one of the most consumer-friendly developers out there, releasing strong content with tons of quality of life updates in a timely manner. It's been exceptionally sad to see CD Projekt Red's seedier side appear in the spotlight of public opinion, and not only knock them off of their pedestal, but also leave them with a reputation that will haunt them as long as their studio exists. Between incredible amounts of critical, game-breaking glitches and bugs that very few players have been able to avoid, transphobic content that has been brushed aside instead of properly addressed, and a background work culture that makes CDPR sound like a worst-case scenario Electronic Arts developer, there have been very few excuses one could give to put Cyberpunk in a positive light. These issues cannot and should not be ignored, and hopefully someday soon we will be able to recommend the game as a now fixed, polished, and all-around solid experience. In the hopes that that day does come, this recommendation is made for then. To me, often the aspect of utmost importance in a game is the story. The drive of the protagonist and their journey towards their end goal is often what will make or break a game for me. With that in mind, first let me say that there are mild spoilers ahead, so skip to the timecode on your screen if you want to avoid them. Ready? Okay. Now, I'm quite thankful to be able to say that despite the overall mess that is Cyberpunk 2077, the game contains a rather quality narrative. To understand this, though, you have to come in with the understanding that the entire marketing campaign behind 2770's storyline is an absolute fucking lie. While the philosophical goal of a mercenary like V, our protagonist, is to, quote-unquote, achieve immortality in a corporate dystopian society where only the elite can attain greatness, that is not what this story is about. Far from it. Rather, V's journey in this game is one about mortality and desperately trying to fend off their impending death. But not so much physical death, though, but rather the death of the soul. Thanks to the damaged relic chip that stores Johnny Silverhand's digitized consciousness being locked into V's head, V's mind is slowly being overwritten with Johnny's, and it's only a matter of time before all that is left will be the anarchistic rocker of days gone by. While there's no actual time limit in the game until V is gone, you feel the clock counting down throughout the entire experience, as hardware malfunctions and sporadic seizures haunt V while they search for a cure. It's in this desperate struggle that I find myself the most infatuated. Cyberpunk's writing allows you to experience a number of character attitudes in ways to address V's impending demise, but through it all, there's an unrelenting fear in their voice. The conversations between V and the various supporting characters who are informed on V's condition really do make you feel for our protagonist. One excellent example conversation comes fairly early on after V's terminal diagnosis with local friend Misty, the assistant to V's local Ripper Doc who provides V with two medications. One to ease and stave off the relic's side effects, and another to instead accelerate them if V so chooses, allowing the inevitable to come to pass as painlessly as possible. In that moment, it really felt to me, and I think V themselves, that the gravity of the situation had cemented. There are easily a dozen more that one could point to, some of which will leave your jaw on the floor and others with a tissue in hand. I really hope to have a rather deep spoiler cast of the game one day to discuss the endings they chose and the routes they went to achieve it. Story isn't the end-all, beat-all reason for me playing Cyberpunk 2077, though. When the game wants to grace you with a bug-free playspace, as rare as that can be, You get to enjoy an exceptionally fun loop of stealth, combat, and hacking that takes strong notes from the most recent Deus Ex games. Many of the quest lines are very well done, featuring fun combat sequences, adequate platforming, and the occasional memorable character encounter. There's a lot to like about this game, really. It's just buried under a thick layer of glitches and problems that could have been properly addressed by 6 more months of QA work. Cyberpunk 2077 is very much deserving of all the ire and disdain that's received. I get that. I think we all get that. At the same time, though, underneath the Vaseline-smeared surface of bugs and issues, you can get a glimpse of a rather solid game and the potential that could grow from it with sequels and expanded content. I want more from this universe, and if CD Projekt Red can get their act together, I'll certainly look forward to a sequel. If you watched my top 10 games of all time video I published several months ago, then the next game in question should not be that big of a surprise, but for those who haven't, spoiler alert, 1999's Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is one of my absolute favorite titles I've had the fortunate experience to play. When 2019's remake of Resident Evil 2 arrived in stores, hey, remember going into stores to buy physical copies of video games? I held out hope that Resident Evil 3 would get the same loving treatment. After all, these days in game development, you don't create that many assets for a game without plans for using them in other projects. Lo and behold, there was a leak later that year, and the rest is history. Welcome to entry number 2 of my enjoyed it but everyone else seemingly didn't trilogy of games on my list this year. Resident Evil 3 is a game that should have been absolutely incredible, using lessons learned from the excellent Resident Evil 2 remake and building on those mechanics. For real, the minute you first meet and get chased by Mr. X in the previous game, you get a strong idea of what Nemesis could be like in such a reimagining. What we got was, well, a moderately enhanced Tyrant in a truncated retelling of Jill Valentine's escape from Raccoon City. The first half of this remake of Resident Evil 3 is honestly very, very good. Exploring the area near the RCPD was delightfully spooky, and being hunted by this much faster and very imposing Nemesis felt exactly how such a remake should feel. It really sells the idea of the enhanced Tyrant as the monster it is supposed to be. I really don't mind many of the changes that were done, with the exception of cutting of great areas like the newspaper office or the restaurant. I just wish that the second half of the game turned out better. While I really enjoyed the reinterpretation of the hospital section, the trade-out of the clock tower, the park, and the factory in favor of just a second Umbrella laboratory felt too safe for what it should be. That being said, it felt much more like the laboratory section the Resident Evil 2 remake should have been, so it was nice to explore. For what it's worth, I really like this remake of Resident Evil 3. It's just a shame at how short it is and how underutilized Nemesis is in the back half of the game. In the back of my mind, I'm hoping that Capcom takes another look at Resident Evil 3 and gives it the treatment it really does deserve. Until then, though, the modding scene has been attempting to address Capcom's shortcomings, and the game's strong replay value has seen me do multiple runs of the game already. But come on, Capcom, really. The greatest antagonist you have ever created deserves better. Do the right thing. To conclude my popular disappointment trilogy, I have at number 8, Doom Eternal. And what else can I say but what in the hell is wrong with you people? I really and truly don't understand why people are so down on this game. Some opinions I've heard have pointed to the story, some to the combat loop, and yet others can't seem to provide a reason and just want to crap all over this great game. Are you people insane? Doom Eternal is fantastic. Doom 2016's launch took the world by surprise 5 years ago, and the lowest bar a sequel could have hoped to aspire to was to simply be more Doom. Doom Eternal, by comparison, is that game not only turned up to 11, but magnified and expanded in all the right ways. The story grows in delightfully ludicrous ways to tell the backstory of the Slayer and brings the eternal conflict to Earth. The combat loop updates and refines the weapons at your disposal while adding new ones to provide more variety. The level design is far more expansive and varied, adding surprisingly strong first-person platforming. And of course, the soundtrack is just as kick-ass. What more can you ask for? I was enthralled throughout my entire playthrough of the campaign. The presentation of the demonic invasion of Earth is stunning. From the moment you jump off the Hell Barge on the ravaged streets of a human city, to the whole world of the Sentinels, where you discover the backstory of the Slayer, everything on display is pure eye candy. Like its predecessor though, the thing I might be most infatuated with is the ludicrous lore id Software is establishing with this entry. Though it feels like it should be impossible for it to be done, it successfully links the original Doom story continuity, or lack thereof, to the new games. Then they took that link and built a goddamn universe out of it, establishing rather strong lore that's well worth the read. At the end of the day, the writing is superfluous to the bang bang shoot 'em up smash experience that is the gameplay. But when they're both equally as good as they are in Doom Eternal, you are in for a treat. And goddamn, if that combat flow isn't something to marvel at. Agility and combat education have received the biggest updates of everything in this sequel to the game's massive, massive benefit. Items like dashing, climbing walls, and swinging off pipes, coupled with the Super Shotgun's new meat hook ability, makes running around combat areas feel incredibly fast. The language of a fight feels so much more transparent now, with many demons being weak to different types of weapons, while at the same time, shared weaknesses between them display similar, if not outright the same, visual designs and cues that inform the player of just how to exploit that weakness. Okay, for example, different enemies with shields or a barrier will all utilize the same color effect for those components, immediately telling you that they would be weak to a plasma rifle burst, and thus taking the guesswork out of the encounter. The new enemy deformation system is so cool too, allowing you to not only damage and destroy their weapons, and also force them to adopt different AI patterns, but also visually show the damage you are causing them prior to death, with meat and sinew being blown or burned off. Just think about this. Most of the visual language these days in games confers inflicting harm on an enemy in a pain animation and a sound effect, with the reaching of a death state tending to be where an actual on-model visual damage indicator like a blood splatter or sometimes dismemberment happens. In Doom Eternal, that model damage and dismemberment is in real time as the fight progresses. In the moment, when you have imps attacking you from your flank and a Hell Knight bearing down on you, being able to see the damage state of your enemies makes it so much easier to prioritize who to kill first. All of this, not to mention the refreshed ammo, health, armor pickup loop, and the inclusion of proper melee attacks, feel incredibly smart, and make the Doomslayer feel like an even more unstoppable juggernaut. Look, I love Doom Eternal. In my eyes, it's the true sequel that Doom 2016 needed to be. Even faster paced, enhanced combat, and a greater story scope keep you coming back for more. It's one of the best experiences of 2020, and I will be damned if I let anyone try to convince me otherwise. Final Fantasy VII is, without a doubt, Squaresoft's magnum opus. As the quintessential JRPG, it's arguable that the PlayStation platform would be vastly different, if not outright not exist today, without it. 7 was a perfect storm of creative talent. The writing of Hironobu Sakaguchi, the direction of Yoshinori Kitase, and the music of Nobuo Uematsu combined together to create an unforgettable experience that to this day is still wowing audiences. For decades, fans have been wanting more, and Square Enix has tried to deliver. Several spin-off games, ports to new platforms, character appearances in other brands, and a feature-length CG film sequel, all of varying degrees of quality, have attempted to sate the public's thirst for more 7 content. But it wasn't until 2015, 17 years after 7's initial release, that the world got the announcement it had been waiting for so long. A proper remake was finally in development. And if I'm being honest, it's kinda genius. Final Fantasy VII Remake is the first of what will be a new Final Fantasy VII series that will probably take the better part of a decade to complete. This first entry, however, if it's any indication of the quality to come, means that we're in for one hell of a ride. Retelling the Midgard chapter, you experience all the events leading up to Avalanche's exodus from the city and the embarking of the gang into the greater world beyond. All in an incredible amount of fidelity that, like the original, heretofore has not been equaled by anything else in Square Enix's library. A lot of people scoffed at the idea that you could take a 6 to 8 hour segment from the original game and stretch it out into a 40 to 50 hour gameplay experience, but honestly, I don't understand how that could not be done in a project of this scale. Think about it. A fully realized Midgar with 17 sectors to potentially explore? What's not to be excited about? What we got wasn't that, though, which is a bit of a shame. I've always wanted to know what the other sectors were like. But that's a topic for another time. Instead, Remake follows the same basic story structure as the original Midgar chapter. The bombings of Mako Reactors 8 and 5, the meeting with Aerith, Wall Market, the Sector 7 plate collapse, the confrontation at Shinra headquarters, and the escape from Midgar are all present and accounted for. It's all done in a surprisingly true to original recreation, down to some of the tiniest placements of items and enemies. It's kind of remarkable. The strength of Final Fantasy VII Remake for me, though, isn't in the presentation, the well-realized real-time combat, or the dedication to the source material. Rather, it comes down to the actual nature of what this game's story is. And, like the Cyberpunk discussion earlier, some spoilers need to be talked about, so skip to the time index on your screen to avoid them. Okay, ready? Final Fantasy VII Remake, in and of itself, is deception as to the very nature of what the game is. It's not a remake by any means, but is, in reality, a sequel to the 1997 original, and the title Final Fantasy VII Remake is instead the name of the first chapter of this new saga.
Nice to meet you again.
Remake is not so much a retelling of the original game's Midgar sequence, but rather a re-experience of those events, set in motion in a manner yet to be revealed in this continuation. Throughout Remake, Cloud and the gang experience the same fundamental events, but at the same time are forced to do so by mysterious specters that ensure that the same basic outcomes come to fruition. While this is happening, Cloud experiences hallucinations and visions of Sephiroth that both didn't occur until much later in the original game, and others that prophesize events yet to occur. Aerith is the most exciting factor in all of this, as she seems to be even more acutely aware of what's going on, dropping subtle hints to Cloud of destiny to come. Having characters moderately aware of their futures and the possibility to alter fate makes the experience fascinating to think about, and what it could mean for the saga going forward. I mean, how exciting is it to imagine that one of the most tragic character deaths in the history of the medium might be alterable? Let alone so many other things that could potentially happen. I don't want to mention anything else, because if you haven't played it yet, I highly encourage you to, but man, it's an exciting time to be a Final Fantasy fan. And that's been something that's been hard to say for a while. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a surprising contradiction of a game, and is both exactly what it says it is, but at the same time, turns into something remarkably different. And I love it for it. While we're going to have to wait a good long while for the story to continue, man, I can't wait to find out what happens next. Full disclosure, I don't play Metroidvanias very often. It's not for a lack of interest though, as a number of my top 10 lists over the years have had such a title on them. Rather, it's a number of small things specific to each title that ends up preventing me from playing them. Perhaps it's the time frame in which it came out was crowded with other titles I was more interested in. Maybe it was something about the visual design that put me off. Or it could have been the unspoken curse of working for this website that some games get so talked about when I'm not playing them at the same time that I feel spoiled, and I'd rather relinquish any time to play them until months or even years after they've faded from the popular zeitgeist, such that I barely remember anything about what was discussed. Such was the case with Ori and the Blind Forest, a game that received vast, unending praise in 2015 and in our Game of the Year awards that year. Yet I felt overexposed to it and sadly never got around to playing it. With its sequel, The Will of the Wisps, having released this past March, and the word on the street being you didn't need to play the original to appreciate the sequel, I sought to rectify this, and man, what a great game this is. What a great game. I cannot start off a monologue about Ori and the Will of the Wisps without first focusing on just how obscenely gorgeous this game is. From start to finish, Ori's second adventure is fantastically, unbelievably beautiful. I don't quite understand how they do it, but developer Moon Studios somehow has the ability to make its 2.5D presentation come alive, making every scene feel like there's a living, breathing world that is just a small camera shift away from becoming a fully realized 3D platformer. Not a single location in The Will of the Wisps lacks care or polish. From the beautiful waterfalls of the Wellspring to the creepy and disgust-inducing tunnels of the Moldwood Depths. Just as wonderful is the soundtrack from returning composer Gareth Coker, whose sweeping score punctuates every exciting chase and every tear-inducing moment to be had. And that's something that Ori and the Will of the Wisps has in spades. Tears. As simple as the story is and is told, this is a game about loss. Loss of family, loss of friends, loss of your home, loss of hope for your future. No character you meet is truly evil, and all the villains Ori is forced to battle have something tragic to their story. It seems like at least once an hour the game's narrator takes over and sad violins play over a scene depicting the heart-rending fate of a character. You even come to feel for the game's monstrous antagonist, and by the end, you find yourself hoping that you don't have to kill them. It's hard to have dry eyes once the credits roll. I think I'll just leave it here for this one, as I've already gone too far in depth with spoilers already in this list. Ori's second adventure is just wonderful, and is absolutely worth your time. While I'm a tad disappointed that Moon Studios' next title won't be a follow-up to The Will of the Wisps, I'm genuinely excited to see what they come up with. Why we don't see more games set in pre-industrial Japan is something I really just don't understand. Japan's national history is filled to the brim with captivating historical conflicts, mythological lore, and political intrigue to fill an incredible amount of games. But it seems that for every single Japan-centric game that's set before the modern era, we see several dozen European-setting games, let alone the hundreds of other major civilizations that have existed outside of Europe in the past 5,000 years. Like, come on, people. The other 6 continents on Earth did happen to exist prior to Magellan's expedition. Maybe go explore those. Again, another rant for another time though, as my number 5 game of 2020, Ghost of Tsushima, needs to be talked about. The newest game from Sucker Punch, a studio that went almost absurdly quiet following the release of their third Infamous title, is an excellent reemergence and will probably be marked as the last great PlayStation 4 exclusive. It's an absolutely stunning game in every measurable sense. From its spectacular presentation based on Akira Kurosawa's classic style, to the dichotomic honor-based and stealth gameplay. Nothing on tap here lacks even a tad of refinement and quality. I kinda wish I could live in Crispy's shoes for just one day so I could sit down and appreciate the cinematic subtleties that are beyond me. Jin Sakai's journey is an exceptional one to embark on. As the nephew and ward of the local samurai lord, Jin is faced with the extraordinary task of trying to unite the fractured remnants of Tsushima to rescue his uncle from the invading Mongolian hordes and liberate the island. However, Jin is forced to try and balance the honor code of Bushido in facing his enemies head-on, while slowly learning that attacks from the shadows are often far more effective. The struggle lasts throughout the game, with all the results and consequences you'd expect, though I'll be lying if I didn't admit that the amount of the player chooses to engage in honor-bound or stealth gameplay doesn't actually have an impact on the progression of the story. Still, it's a great ride to go on. It's the first PlayStation game I have ever platinumed, so that should give you an idea of how invested I was. As you can see on screen, my absolute favorite parts of the game were the cinematic duels, pitting you one-on-one with a masterful opponent. In a number of ways, they feel very reminiscent of the boss battles from 2018's God of War game, minus the absurd difficulty spikes of some of the later Valkyries. Each battle is a difficult ballet of parrying, dodging, and counterattacking at precisely the right moment, with no room for you to cheese your opponent. It's either skill or death in these fights. Each battle is fought in a wonderfully cinematic setting that reinforces the Kurosawan style that makes you want to repeat these fights multiple times just for the visual spectacle alone. Ghost of Tsushima is simply fantastic on every front. If you haven't gotten your hands on it just yet, or you have plans or actually already own a PS5, I cannot understate how much of an upgrade the game is on the new console. The game runs at a near rock solid 60 frames per second. Heck, part of me wishes that this would have been a launch title instead of just a regular release. Between the frame rate and the load times, the PS5 version is the definitive experience here. It's a great game. And given that, historically speaking, a second Mongol invasion occurred 7 years later after the events of this story, I get the feeling we'll be returning to Tsushima before not too long. 4 years ago, a relatively little-known German developer named Mamimi released a tactics-focused isometric stealth game called Shadow Tactics: Blades of the Shogun. As the name implies, you played as a hodgepodge group of ninjas, samurai, and thieves in service to the local shogun, who are tasked with uncovering a conspiracy in feudal Japan. While Shadow Tactics barely missed my top 10 games of the year for 2016, which, to be fair, was filled to the brim with exceptional games, it's been occupying a special place in my heart since that time. 4 years later, Mamimi has repeated their success with Shadow Tactics by applying the exact same formula to long-forgotten Western series Desperados, and holy cow, is it a damn good game. In all honesty, Desperados was a franchise that I wasn't particularly familiar with, and I wouldn't blame anyone for not remembering it either. After all, its last official entry was released back in 2007 to moderate reviews, and wasn't even able to use the series' title in the name because of a trademark dispute. Desperados 3 is THQ Nordic's attempt to introduce the series to a new generation by presenting a prequel set before the events of the first game, and telling the story of how the cast of characters came together. It's a rather simple Western revenge story that we've all seen before, just never quite done this way. And for what it's worth, it's serviceable. The cast has fun chemistry, the missions you on run a delightful gambit of Old West tropes, and the villain our crew must face are the right amount of despicable. The gameplay is where Desperados 3 truly shines, though. When I said that Mamimi was applying the exact same formula they used for Shadow Tactics to this game, I 100% meant it. Save for the characters and their abilities, the gameplay is exactly like that 2016 gem, down to the cinematics, the visual cues, and the hints that they throw at you. For those who are unfamiliar, though, let me paint you a picture. Desperados 3 is not an action game, but rather a stealth-focused trial-and-error puzzle game that is both exceedingly challenging while at the same time more fair than you would expect. The game actively encourages save-scum gameplay to encourage you to try multiple strategies and ideas over and over and over again in rapid succession. Quick saving and quick loading dozens and dozens of times per mission. I'm not exaggerating here. A timer will pop up prominently on your screen to remind you how long it has been since you last saved. And sure, you can theoretically play through an entire mission with minimal saving and retrying, but given how it's an instant game over if any of your characters die, and your enemies are very, very competent in combat, it's not worth the risk. Fans of stealth games will find the gameplay loop here of scouting locations, tracking enemy movement patterns, and taking out targets quietly to be quite gratifying. Most missions in the game will spread out or only pair up characters of different skill sets on opposite sides of the map and challenge you to learn the ins and outs of each one, only at the end of the game bringing everyone together as a group once you've mastered them all. The returning tactics queuing ability from Shadow Tactics, now dubbed Showdown Mode, reinforces the drive to master each character's skill set, whether that means having Kata Hera toss a perfume vial to temporarily blind a patrol while John Cooper executes a nearby guard with a throwing knife, or having Doc McCoy snipe a sharpshooter from a distance while Isabel Moreau sneaks past their sightline. Almost every single combination possible seems prepped and offered as a viable strategy throughout all the game's missions, and post-completion Baron challenges offer mixed-up ways to play previous levels, with different characters and objectives to complete at your disposal. There's a lot to love here. Desperados 3 is one I've been looking forward to for a good long while, and it's everything I could have hoped for. With the recently released trilogy of DLC expansion levels, I plan to return to the game in the very near future to hopefully get a glimpse of what Mimimi is working on next. Whatever that will be, I'm certain it'll be a day one purchase for me.
It's all a blur.
Without fail, every year some weird-ass, entirely unexpected game that shares almost nothing in common with the rest of my list gets put up, and also without fail, the comments from the crew and the community are filled with confusion and disbelief. 4 years ago, it was Cyberpunk Bartending Action Valhalla, followed by Get Even, The Messenger, and then last year, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. It's not that I'm actively seeking out these gems of games for the explicit purpose of bringing them to light, but rather they each somehow find me at the exact right moment. This year's list is without exception to this rule, thanks to 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim. But the truth of the matter is that Vanillaware's latest is far more in line with my taste than I think most people would believe. In the lead up to 13 Sentinels, I only knew two things for certain about this game. One, it was absolutely beautiful, and two, it was about fighting giant monsters with mechs.
That was scary.
Now, I'm an absolutely gigantic Godzilla fan, so if you thought I wasn't completely sold from the minute I learned this, you'd be dead wrong. What I got to play was not at all what I expected, though. In my mind, I was expecting something more akin to a Super Sentai experience with a modern story. What I got instead was a mind-bending, time-hopping, gigantic mystery game that just so happened to be about fighting giant monsters with mechs. And holy shit, what a story it is. 13 Sentinels is a mystery that never relents in keeping you excited from one story episode to the next across all 13 protagonist accounts of the time leading up to the day of the final battle, when giant mechanical kaiju from the future arrive in the past to destroy humanity. Even over 20 hours into this game, you still don't even know half of the story, with incomplete glimpses given to you occasionally of the greater implications of what really is happening. Only when the credits roll do you really understand the full scope of the story, and I would challenge anyone to not be completely stunned. Across the 30-plus hour story, you get to experience disjointed yet somehow interconnected accounts from the perspectives of the 13 members of the main cast, each having their own mystery to explore and uncover. From Shu Amaguchi's experiences talking to a musical idol through his television late at night, Ryoko Shinanomi's amnesic search for a traitor from the future, to time-displaced World War II naval officer Takatoshi Hijiyama's exploration of the streets of 1985 Japan, no two stories are truly alike. My favorite of the bunch is easily Natsuno Minami, and her tale of meeting an alien robot like something straight out of E.T. And no, you might be screaming at your monitor about me spoiling things, but trust me when I say that everything I've said up to this point is absolutely nothing in the grand scope of 13 Sentinels. On the flip side of the game's narrative excursions, 13 Sentinels also includes a tactical battle mode set during the final battle against the kaiju. Each level consists of wave-based defensive combat against hordes of kaiju across a different sector of the city with main objectives to complete. The presentation here is decidedly not the visual tour de force that Vanillaware's games have previously been known for, as it's instead a grid-based, radar-like representation of the battle as it progresses. While this is a bit of a disappointment, the mode does actually grow on you as you progress and level up each pilot sentinel, leading eventually to some of the most incredibly outlandish displays of power that the mecha genre has been known for. If you can imagine yourself being on the bridge of a starship like in Macross or Gundam, and watching the tactical display of mecha and fighters firing railguns and pods of hundreds of missiles at dozens of targets constantly, then you're in the right mindset. Sure, I would have loved to see Vanillaware's incredible art style put to use in proper on-screen combat, but at the end of the day, what's here turned out to be rather good. 13 Sentinels is such a remarkable game to play, and I'm so glad I got to. I cannot understate how much I want each and every one of you to play this game. Please, for the love of God, buy this one and experience it. We need Vanillaware to continue on and make more great games like 13 Sentinels. Please? If you caught my Game of the Year video for 2019 or saw my Greatest Games of All Time video I put out back in October, you probably know that Ace Combat is one of my most beloved franchises in gaming. To be an Ace Combat fan, though, you have to be willing to endure long stretches between titles. Although, with Ace Combat 7 now being the most sold entry in the entire series, the wait until the next one might be a more tolerable wait. On a rare occasion, you'll see the release of a competitor title that tries to emulate the series, but despite hopes to the contrary, these titles always seem to fail to capture the magic that Project Aces brings to the table. That is, until this past December, when Project Wingman arrived on Steam. A Kickstarter game organized by fans of the franchise, the project was pitched as a streamlined and concise product. Only a handful of support tiers, no physical tie-in merch, no DLC, no additional platform releases, and 0 stretch goals were included. Just 3 gameplay modes and VR support, nothing else. What was pitched was what they were planning on delivering, and sure enough, on December 1st, 2020, 100% of that pitch was available for purchase. It's sad that the Kickstarter success story often ends in disappointment in some way, shape, or form, whether the final product comes in underwhelming or, in the most tragic cases, ends up being canceled together. But this is not one of those stories. So what is Project Wingman then? The answer? Excellent. Wingman doesn't just wear its love for the Ace Combat series on its shoulder, rather it shoves it in your face from start to finish by creating what I think may be one of the most beloved tributes to a franchise I've ever seen. The game emulates the Project Aces formula in absolutely all the right ways. From the arcade-style flight models to the dozens upon dozens of enemies you'll face each mission, the fantastical nature of the sci-fi aircraft and the fictionalized post-calamity world, everything presented is exceptionally well executed. Even the constant in-mission banter between your wingmen and your enemies is that right amount of tension and cheese that you come to love and expect from these games. But more importantly, Project Wingman empowers you like a proper Ace Combat game does. Starting out as just a regular pilot as a member of a flight of a PMC, you gradually earn the respect of the Cascadian military and your fellow pilots before becoming the most hunted fighter of the conflict. By the time you've earned a rival and begin changing the tide of the war, you're no longer just seen as another merc in it for a paycheck, but rather the heroic Hitman squadron leader who is doing the impossible, pushing the Pacific Federation back and liberating the country. You feel powerful, respected, and most importantly, you feel like you're actually making a difference. It's a beautiful thing. Equally beautiful, though, is the final most respected element of the Project Aces formula, and it's something that there's almost no equal to: the soundtrack. While Project Wingman is indeed a no-frills game, the music is where the game surprisingly excels. French composer Hervé Pavly, whose body of work mostly consists of short films, put together a score that draws exceptional inspiration from Keiki Kobayashi's work on Ace Combats 4 through 7, delivering the thrill of aerial combat, the urgency of knowing when you are outclassed, and, most importantly, absolutely stellar boss fight tracks. The final boss theme, Kings, is one you can easily listen to for hours on end, and is probably my favorite bit of music of the entire year. Pavly should be very, very proud of the work he put into Project Wingman, and hopefully he's going to get a ton of great offers for work soon. It can often be argued that when you buy an Ace Combat game, you're buying an interactive soundtrack that just so happens to come with a free aerial dogfight game. Project Wingman is such a title. At $30, Project Wingman is a steal of a game that die-hard Project Aces fans should readily add to their Steam library. I'm hoping that we not only get ports to the next generation system soon, but also news of publishing deals and sequel funding offers. Project Aces should take a good, long, hard look at this title, as this 3-man team of developers did an astounding job. In 2007, Valve released the second episode in what was to be a trilogy of continuations to Half-Life 2. A game that many rightfully claim to be among the greatest titles that would ever grace this medium of entertainment. Half-Life 2 Episode 2 would go on to be similarly strongly regarded but forever known for a sadder reason, as it would become known as one of the greatest cliffhangers in all of gaming. Despite promises and hopes to the contrary, the conclusion to this epic trilogy never came, and for 13 years, the franchise refused to resurface. Years upon years of rumors, unsubstantiated leaks, and overanalyzed updates to the source engine resulted in little to be believed, let alone actually confirmed. For all intents and purposes, it appeared like Valve would never truly return to the franchise. And then, just like that, they did. Nearly 13 years after the Combine occupation forces were cut off from their extra-dimensional empire at a terrible cost, Half-Life has returned to tell the next story in this fascinating world, this time starring one of gaming's most beloved companions, Alex Vance. And goddamn, it is one hell of a game. Half-Life has always been a sort of technology demonstrator series, a showcase title designed to let Valve stretch their legs and show you just what they are truly capable of. Half-Life 1 in 1998 showed off intuitive combat, puzzle design, and scripted narration not really done in a first-person shooter like this before, all contained in one giant interconnected world. 6 years later, Half-Life 2 showed off the capabilities of the Source engine, demonstrating unprecedented physics manipulation technology and stunning visual design that still holds up nearly 17 years later. In that same tradition, Half-Life Alyx shows us just what you can do with virtual reality headsets and finally cements that this technology is, once and for all, ready for prime time. Despite the limiting nature of being a PC-only high-end VR release, and thus pricing most of the audience out of being able to play it, Half-Life Alyx lives up to its legacy as being not only an exceptional technology demonstrator, but also a damn good game. In my case, I was fortunate enough to experience the game in the most optimal of conditions, with a Valve Index headset, a pair of Knuckles controllers, which are really cool by the way, and a large enough space to move around in. It's a stunning experience to engage in. The level of interactivity is one that I feel few VR games have been able to achieve, let alone as a roaming, full-player motor-controlled method of play instead of a typical horde arena shooter in which you just remain stationary, picking up cans, smashing boxes, and upending almost every object in the environment, searching for loot, ammo, or health to progress, feels like anything but a chore. The Russells, a pair of gloves that act as a pseudo-prelude to the gravity gun, allow you to summon highlighted objects at a distance to your hands at the flick of a wrist, and it feels so satisfying. Being pinned down by enemy fire, summoning a grenade off a dead Combine soldier, and then activating and lobbing it back at your opponents is one of the coolest things you can imagine doing in VR, and that's just one example in a litany of ideas on tap here. From covering your mouth to hold your breath and thus conceal your presence from an unstoppable enemy, to picking up a chair to use as a shield as headcrabs lunge for your tasty hippocampus, to even something as simple as being able to draw on a window with in-game markers. You won't go 10 minutes without finding something smile-inducing happening, and telling you in unspoken words that, yes, you can actually do that. In Alex's shoes, we get to see what life was like in City 17, 5 years before an inbound train would deliver Gordon Freeman and the subsequent destruction of the currently under construction Citadel. Tasked with finding a secret Combine vault hiding something nefarious, your journey with Alex will take you through familiar-looking sections of the Eastern European city while introducing you to new locations that will soon be unforgettable. The story for this new adventure is just as grand as the level of gameplay achievement here, and, for a Half-Life fan, brings you back into the world that is slowly being strangled by the Combine in a wondrous way, but also satisfies by serving as a continuation of where our story left off 13 years ago. I won't go into specifics, and if you have any intention of playing Alyx at any point whatsoever, don't you dare look up the story summary in Wikipedia. But suffice to say, as the credits roll, we are left with a stunning conclusion that might even eclipse that of Episode 2. What will no doubt be one of the most thrilling aspects of Half-Life Alyx may not necessarily be the game itself, but rather its legacy. As the first fully developed Source 2 engine game, Alyx offers up a glimpse of not only the fidelity and possibilities of Valve's long-in-development programming suite, but also a second renaissance for user-generated content. Even without a full Hammer-style editor available, users for months have been creating custom content for Alyx, from new maps and weapons within the same universe, while others have seen things like a recreation of PT and a sandbox creation mode a la classic Garry's Mod. The Source modding community has been the most tremendous home for custom content this industry has ever seen. Now take a moment to think about an upgraded version of that open-ended engine and imagine the possibilities. It's an enticing future to imagine, and one that's already begun to bear fruit. The prospect of a Half-Life 3 is perhaps one of the most daunting things any developer could imagine trying to tackle. To conclude one of the most beloved sagas in all of gaming, demonstrate new technology possibilities, and do both in the best possible manner, I'd be frightened too. In that sense, I understand why it took well over a decade before the next chapter of the story arrived. But arrived it has. Half-Life Alyx is the start of something new, something exciting. Not only a new act in Valve's existence, but also a return to what the company does best, creating exciting, handcrafted adventures that never, ever stop being fun. Half-Life 2 and the Source engine helped shape the 10 years of gaming that followed it, and so too shall Alyx and Source 2. Half-Life Alyx isn't just the best game of 2020. It's perhaps the most important. Alright guys, that's it. That's my list for 2020. Thank you very much for watching. Apologies for making you wait so long for these to come out, but hey, what can you do? There's a pandemic going on. We had a great year, and I have a feeling 2020, with a brand new console suite and a whole new generation of games that we'll learn from Half-Life Alyx, we're in for a fucking treat, man. Y'all have a good day. Thanks.